Your right as a citizen to constrain their tax increases is ruled illegal by the court. Their right to keep raising taxes without limit sails through.
I just want to say something to the rest of the country that thinks that California is, quote, so blue, and we deserve it because we voted for it. Open your eyes and see that the people of California were about to constrain the power of the government to raise taxes, and the government refused to allow the vote.
Hello everyone, welcome to I'm going to call it another emergency edition of the Steve Hilton Show. We seem to be doing a lot of those these days because there seem to be a lot of things happening, particularly at this time of year, that just come up and cause huge issues for us here in California and demand an immediate reaction. And that's what we're here to provide, some analysis and reaction to the latest really big bombshell that happened at the end of last week. We're taping this on Monday morning, June the 24th. This was last week on Thursday. The California Supreme Court threw off the ballot an initiative that we have spent so much time talking about, the Taxpayer Protection and Government Accountability Act, that was qualified for the ballot. It went through all the normal procedures as mandated by the Constitution. Voters wanted it on the ballot. This was a measure, as you know, because you've been following this show, designed to rein in the absolutely out of control taxation, the mania for taxation, endless taxes levied on us at the state level, at the local level. And this was a measure put there by the people to rein that in. And of course, now that's not going to happen because it's been thrown off the ballot. To help us understand what happened, our friend Susan Shelley, of course, you know Susan because she's our regular guest here on the Steve Hilton Show. But more than that, she was absolutely part of the team that put this measure on the ballot, that crafted it and was part of the operation to get it on the ballot, as I say, in all the right ways. And now it's not going to be on the ballot, and we want to understand why and where we go from here. Susan, great to see you today. Thank you for doing this. Just your overall reaction to what happened and how you see things.
Well, this is extremely serious because the people of California have direct democracy rights that have been in the Constitution since 1911 to check the power of a corrupt and indolent government. That's what they said at the time. We have direct democracy powers, and the government that it is supposed to check is now attacking the initiative, referendum, and recall processes in many different ways, and this is their crowning achievement. Here was a citizen initiative to amend the Constitution to protect taxpayers and make the government accountable for fees and taxes that it levies, just to make the elected officials accountable for that, not to stop them, just to make them accountable for it. And the governor and the legislature sued to have it taken off the ballot after 1.43 million California voters signed petitions to put it on the ballot, as is their right under the Constitution. It qualified for the ballot. The governor and the legislature said, we don't like that. We think that goes too far, and we are going to sue to have it taken off the ballot. And in the middle of budget season, with the judiciary's budget hanging in the balance, after the Chief Justice went to the legislature and gave the State of the Judiciary speech about how they understand that there are budget cuts and they're willing to do their part, but they're worried that they don't want to see any cuts to the judiciary. In the middle of that season comes this lawsuit from the governor and the legislature to take the Taxpayer Protection Act off the ballot. And by a unanimous vote, the judiciary did that. The state Supreme Court said, yeah, fine. We don't want taxpayers to have protection because that goes too far. That revises the Constitution rather than just amends the Constitution. That goes too far. We're taking it off the ballot. Now, to be clear, the correct way to do this is the people vote on it, and if it's unconstitutional, it can be challenged after it is adopted. And it had a severability clause in it so that if any one provision was viewed as unconstitutional, it could be severed and the rest would go into effect. They did not want to risk that. They took it off the ballot to make sure that voters could not pass any of it. And this is extremely serious because it is effectively giving the government a veto over what the people can constrain the government from doing. Very serious.
It is, and I'm so glad you're here to help us understand it. There's a couple of things there. I mean, there's a lot to say, so we're just going to take it step by step and go through this. Um, a couple of things I want to pick up on there, which is the convention that this is normally that something like this would happen after the voters have had their say, and secondly, the severability point, which has not been mentioned in any commentary that I've seen so far. Let's take the first point, which is the sequencing. So you said, and this has been, and I think they themselves in their ruling, the California Supreme Court said something about, well, normally we would weigh in after this has been voted on. But this time we're weighing in beforehand. That's true, isn't it? Wasn't that in their opinion?
Yes, it was. And the
So
reason is not
what's
very
going on
legal.
there? Yeah.
The reason is they think it's inconvenient for the government. They think it's inconvenient for the government if the people might vote to reverse tax increases that passed without a two-thirds approval. There are about 9 taxes statewide that were put on the ballot by citizens' initiatives. And under a loophole created by the state Supreme Court in 2017, the court said, or rather suggested without really deciding, that if a tax increase is put on the ballot by a citizens' initiative, maybe the Constitution doesn't apply. Now, they made this up, and the appellate courts have pushed this loophole wider and wider. And so what the Taxpayer Protection Act was going to do was to say that these citizen initiative tax increases do need a two-thirds vote if they're for a special purpose, just as the Constitution says, no matter how they got on the ballot, they need a two-thirds vote. In order to prevent the Taxpayer Protection Act from freezing those taxes after a year, what it said is that all of these taxes that didn't get a two-thirds vote would have to go back on the ballot within a year for voter approval again and would need a two-thirds vote. And the Supreme Court thought that was just too inconvenient for the local governments. But that is not a legal decision. That's a political, legislative policy decision. And that's why they did this. They said it's just too disruptive to the government for the people to say they don't want their taxes to be higher. Can you imagine? This is
By
outrageous.
the way, the context for all this, I mean, you're right. It's supposed to be legal, not policy wise, but just on the policy, let's remind everyone of the context. We have here in California the highest taxes in America, right? Already. So it's not as
Okay.
if, we have a government starved of funds, that is sort of desperate for money because, people are going to die in the street. No, we have already the highest taxes in the country, and the budget of the state of California, as I've pointed out regularly, if you go back not that long, just over a decade ago, it was under 100 billion. Now, I mean, the one they've just passed is 300 billion. I mean, they've basically trebled the budget in just over a decade. So they're awash in our cash. So the idea that this is, some, like it's so impossible for them to sort of carry on because they're so starved of cash is completely ridiculous. But just on this point about when they would rule something's unconstitutional, is that is it a convention? It's not in the law because but what reason did they actually give for saying we're going to rule on this now rather than after the election as we normally do? What did they say?
Well, that was the reason. They did not want to be disruptive to the local governments because if the Taxpayer
So it was an
Protection Act
operational decision. It wasn't. It was. What's that got to do with the law? That's crazy.
exactly. And they are not deferring to the people's power of initiative the way they did when they were looking at the tax increases. At the tax controls, they're saying we're striking down the power of initiative. On the tax increases, the so-called citizen initiative tax increases, the reasoning there was, well, the power of the citizens' initiative, the people's right to raise their taxes may not be impinged. That was the sort of attitude about raising taxes. But when it comes to controlling taxes, now they're deferring to the government. Now they're saying the people don't have the right. They can't enact a control like
It's
this.
interesting. So it's a one-way street. So it's inconsistent. What their ruling is inconsistent with what they've previously said
Exactly.
about about their role in tax increases that are there put there and in policy affecting tax that's put there by the citizen. When it's tax increases, they want to give full power to the citizen. When it's restraining tax increases, they want to give power to the government. That's basically what they've
Exactly.
shown. Okay.
That's
So
exactly
let's
what they've
talk
done.
about the severability clause, because I hadn't heard that till you just mentioned it. And here I want to bring up something that actually I've seen from in the commentary from some conservative legal experts. Let's use that, or not even the word conservative, but some legal experts who are definitely on, I would say, allies of yours and agree that who support the Taxpayer Protection and Government Accountability Act, who are supporters of what Howard Jarvis, where you have a role, and also the Business Roundtable. We should have said at the beginning, the two organizations that were leading this, Business Roundtable and Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association.
And the California Business Properties Association also.
Great, thank you. And people who support what you're doing here said, well, actually, this should have been foreseen by the people who are behind this initiative, and they misled people into thinking that this would pass muster constitutionally. It did go too far, and if they'd just been a little bit more modest in their demands, they could have had a win here. Instead, they overreached, and so you got this situation, and it could have been predicted because of this difference between a constitutional amendment and a constitutional revision, and their lawyers should have told them this, and they shouldn't have raised all this money and gone around, promising that we're going to have this this is going to really work, because actually you could have predicted this. And actually, it sounds like your severability point there, the severability clause, is a bit of an answer to that, which is to say, okay, fine. If there's some things that go too far here, tell us, we'll take them out, and let's go forward with the rest of it. I mean, is that the answer to
That's
that question?
that has been the law, and that has been the practice. You put a severability clause in, and if any of the individual provisions are found to be unconstitutional after the election, that is severed from the measure, and the rest of it goes forward.
Wow.
But the government didn't want that, because they felt that there might be one or two things that are very attractive to the voters, and
Right.
the voters will vote for that, and it's sort of in their view, tricking the voters into adopting the rest of it. But actually, that's the way it goes. Where is it written that the voters cannot adopt a measure because the government thinks some of it's too seductive? Where is that in the Constitution? This is absurd. It is absolutely the right of the people to amend the Constitution. And there was nothing in this that was a revision of the Constitution. Let's be clear about how we got here. The courts have been eroding the Constitution itself. And many of the provisions in this put back what was already in the Constitution, like the 2/3 vote to raise special taxes. That's in the
Okay. Yeah.
Constitution. You're not revising it to reinforce that.
And what about the amendment point? Because the argument was made that adding the 2/3 vote to state taxes, that's a
It
bigger
was not a
deal,
it was
and
not a
therefore,
2/3 vote. It's been misreported. It was not a 2/3 vote for state taxes. What it said, currently the law on raising state taxes from Proposition 13, which, by the way, would not have qualified for the ballot under this ruling. It would have been stopped. But under Proposition 13, it takes a 2/3 vote of each house of the legislature, the Senate and the Assembly, followed by the governor's signature to raise state taxes. Under this measure, it would have taken a 2/3 vote of each house, the signature of the governor, and the majority approval of the statewide electorate. So these taxes would have gone on the ballot for majority approval. And the government doesn't want that, because they want to raise your taxes. Now, why do they want to raise your taxes, which, as you said, are the highest state taxes in the country? 13.3% top rate income tax, state income tax, highest state sales tax, highest gas taxes, highest state taxes in general in this state. Why do they want to raise taxes further? Because they have spent money recklessly, in excess of revenue, in excess of reasonable revenue projections. And they have spent us from a $100 billion surplus to a $45 billion deficit, I think it is at last total.
yeah.
And because of that, the governor is going to declare a fiscal emergency. Where's the emergency? The emergency is they want to spend more money than the people of California are willing to give them, and so they are taking away your right to constrain their taxation. And it's outrageous, and people should be up in arms about this. And the judiciary was completely political in this, completely political, in yielding to the governor's wishes to take away a qualified initiative from the November ballot that the people of California had a right to vote on. This was a stolen election.
What about the argument that this really shouldn't be in the, all of this is, these are policy questions about the level of tax and so on. And, you know, people who want low taxes should just do better at getting elected. Um, and and it's not really the business of the Constitution in this way to interfere in what a elected government in the form of the supermajority that you currently have in the legislature plus the governor. If they want to do it, well, that's that. You do better at winning elections.
Well, that was the argument in 1911 against the initiative, the referendum, and the recall. And the counter argument is that a government can become captured by special interests, and it becomes impossible to defeat the people who are funded by special interests. At that time, it was the railroads. Now it's the public employee unions.
Unions,
The
yeah,
rapacious, insatiable public employee unions. There is never enough. They want more and they want more and they want more. And the people of California are tapped out and
yeah.
trying to constrain taxation in this state.
That's a really, really powerful argument because the because that's at the heart, in many ways, of the fiscal crisis and the never-ending tax increases, which is hidden from view because all these conversations, for example, right now, at the same time as all this is going on, you've had negotiations on the budget, and are we going to cut this? Are we going to cut that? This kind of spending, that kind of spending, including spending for disabled kids, that's being cut. So that they can protect some of their other programs, that's particularly on climate change. That's an egregious one. So all these cuts coming in. But the one thing that's never discussed and never happens is cuts to the luxury pensions and healthcare that they give to their donors, the government unions. And actually, this level of tax that we have is in large part driven by that. I mean, even when you look at school spending, and they call it school spending, but actually, when you break down the numbers, it's pensions and healthcare for retirees, and at a level way higher than in other states, way higher even than in neighboring Democrat-run states. Um, and so that's a very, very powerful argument, which is that when you have a system, which is what we have now, that is totally captured by special interest through corrupt donations, and it is corrupt because they give the money and they get in exchange taxpayer cash for their pensions and healthcare and other perks. Um, what else are you going to do? You have to. So it's in a way, it's a checks and balances argument, isn't it? It's
Yes, it
that the
is.
citizens have to have a way of restraining a government that's been totally captured by special interests. I'm just repeating what you're saying because it's a very, very powerful, it's really at the heart of this. What else are you going to do? Because it's so hard to win elections when you've got so much money and organizing muscle on the other side, um, through the machine of the government unions, who are rewarded after the election by the people they help elect.
It's completely corrupt. The California government is completely corrupt, and it is all legal. It is legal corruption. And it is tapping out the people of this state. And the people of this state, as everyone has noticed, are now the people of other states in many cases because they can't take it anymore. And major employers have left by the hundreds from this state because they can't take it anymore. And the
Yes.
policies of this government, which are cravenly pandering to the public employee unions and other unions, cravenly pandering to them, and totally captured by them. They are destroying this state. And the
Yeah.
initiative power is the last hope for the people
Yes.
of California to restrain that. And now the judiciary has taken the measure off the ballot that was crafted to close loopholes that the judiciary itself created and to create checks and balances on taxation. Outrageous, very destructive to the state of California. Any business in America that is thinking of locating in California, they're turning around the U-Haul right now and going back where they came from.
So I want to get to make sure we have spend time on the judiciary, on the court, on who these people are, who made this decision, what we can do about it. That's very important. Doesn't get any coverage really. Just before we get to that, I want to go back to this, um, point that really has been the focus of the commentary, which is the difference, if there is one, between a constitutional amendment and a constitutional revision. We've sort of touched on it in this conversation. What what are they saying? I mean, what they say is that an amendment is fine, but a revision goes too far for a ballot initiative? Is that a distinction without a difference, or is there something real there?
Well, if you wanted to divide the state into 5 or 6 separate states, as there was a proposal to do that, that was, I believe, taken off the ballot. That is a revision. To divide California into 6 separate states is a revision. To completely restructure it and say, well, instead of 3 branches of government, we're going to have 6 branches of government, that's a restructuring. What was this? This was attempting to make the fees and the charges that are levied by agencies, unaccountable bureaucrats, go back to an elected body for a vote. What's so unreasonable about that? If an agency has this delegated power to impose fees, which are really taxes, shouldn't the people who are elected be accountable for that? That's what the measure did. Is that a restructuring? Is that a revision of the Constitution? Or is that just the basic structure that we had in the Constitution, which has been ignored by this growth of the administrative state, which, by the way, is designed to spread the blame out so that everyone can point the finger somewhere else and say, well, it's not us, it's the legislature. No, it's not us, the legislature, it's the agency. Or, oh, we're going to point blame somewhere else. It's all just, you're just going to have to pay more because we're not sure why, and no one's accountable for it. We see that in homelessness spending. We see fees and charges and taxes and costs and contracts, and no one's accountable for anything. So this was an effort to drive the accountability back to the elected officials, which is the structure of the Constitution. It is not a revision of the Constitution. It's an outrage. It's just the government trying to make sure that it's easier to raise taxes.
All right, let's talk about this court. How many people on the California Supreme Court?
There are 7.
Who appoints them?
The governor appoints them. I believe that they were all appointed by either Jerry Brown, Gavin Newsom, or Arnold Schwarzenegger. I think there's one appointed by Arnold Schwarzenegger. After they're appointed, they are confirmed not by the Senate, but by a judicial commission, which is, I believe, from the Bar Association. So it's kind of an inside game all the way around. There isn't a whole lot of accountability on their appointments.
So now, the legislature has no role in the appointment. It's purely the judicial commission, which is the legal industry, as it were, confirming
That's
them.
my understanding, yes.
Crazy.
And there were 4 of them, I believe, who were they're up for retention. They have 12-year terms. They are up for retention every 12 years. After they're appointed, they have to stand for retention in the next gubernatorial election. So within 4 years, they have to stand for retention. In 2022, I believe 3 or 4 of them did stand for retention. And there was an article in CalMatters, which I thought was very interesting. It talked about how uncontroversial the court was, that they just stayed away from controversy and they stayed in their lane and nobody really knew who they were. They were very anonymous. Well, no more. No more are they anonymous. In fact, I looked at the bio on the Supreme Court's website for Patricia Guerrero, who is the Chief Justice. And Patricia Guerrero said on her website bio that she believes the 3 branches of government should work together. Now, my understanding was that we had checks and balances between the 3 branches of government, not that it was the judiciary's role to work with the governor and the legislature to accomplish their policy goals. But that's what happened here. And there it is right on her bio.
So 6 out of 7 appointed by Democrat governors.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
And so this is just to adopt the language that Democrats, people like Gavin Newsom, and their media allies use the entire time about the 6-3 court at the national level. This is much more biased than the Trump's Supreme Court, right, which they constantly rail against. This is a left-wing court. It's 6-1 left-wing court. I mean, is that a fair description to use their language, right, that they use in relation to the current Supreme Court at the federal level, which they very happily describe as a far-right extremist conservative court? This is
they are anti-taxpayer. They are 7-0 anti-taxpayer, and so are the appellate courts anti-taxpayer, and they are ruling over and over again in cases involving taxpayer protection that they are interpreting away the taxpayer protections. There was recently a case in San Jose involving pension obligation bonds and whether voters have the right to vote on it, because voters have the right to vote on bonds. But here the court said, well, pensions are so important. Pensions are really good. Pensions are so important. We don't think the voters should vote on it, is essentially what the ruling was. Well, this is unacceptable. It's unacceptable that they are interpreting away your 2/3 vote protection. They are interpreting away your protection to vote on taxes, or even to have the legislature vote on taxes. There was a case involving the Chamber of Commerce over the cap and trade program, where an appellate court said the cap and trade program is not a tax because it's voluntary. They said, and I quote, if they don't want to pay it, they can go out of business. This is a
That's a quote.
greenhouse gas reduction fee. It's a
Amazing.
permit to emit greenhouse
That's a
gases.
quote from who?
It's from the appellate court in
Right.
the case involving, I guess it's CARB versus the Chamber of Commerce. I'm not sure of the exact title of the case, but it's the
Okay.
Chamber of Commerce case involving the cap and trade program. It's voluntary because if they don't want to pay it, they can go out of business. So it's
So
not
these
a tax.
people who, so it's a, I just got, people may say, no, you shouldn't use this language. I'm just using the language that's used by the Democrats all the time. It's they talk about the conservative court. This is a left-wing court, 6-1, right?
On taxpayer issues, it is a left-wing court.
Right.
Absolutely.
So it's not I mean, they're appointed by Democrats. What do we know about the individuals? And what can we do about the individuals? I mean, is it like the Supreme Court where you just have to wait, wait and have
Yeah.
other people appointed, or what's the deal here?
Well, they have 12-year terms, and then they are subject to retention elections, but the ones who were elected in 2022 are essentially up in 2035, and so that's not terribly helpful, but they are all subject to recall. All Supreme Court justices, all appellate court judges, they are all subject to recall. And on the Secretary of State's website, you can find the complete directions on how to do that. And all 7 can be recalled simultaneously if the people of California so desire.
And could that be in one election? Could you put them all on one, or is it a separate vote for each one?
It's a separate vote for each one, but it could all be in the same election. If they all qualify at the same time, it would all be in the same election. And you would see 7 names on there, and there would be a recall vote for each of them. So it's a question of collecting the signatures, filing the petition, complying with all the rules for filing it, and public announcement of the rest of it. If the signatures were collected, just as the governor can be recalled, and there is a gubernatorial recall going on right now. There's an effort to collect signatures. Yes. That's at rescuecalifornia.org. I know you've talked to Ann Dunsmore about that.
Absolutely.
So that's ongoing.
By the way, yeah, no, exactly. And I just want to make a point to people watching and listening that if you look at what's there's something happened, in my mind, just when you look at what's going on with this, what we just saw that we've been discussing here with taxpayer protection, and then you look at how they're behaving in relation to Prop 47 on crime and another initiative that was put there by the voters, qualified, comfortably. That was announced 2 weeks ago, to reform Prop 47, the ridiculous initiative that was totally missold, deceitfully sold to the voters, which is such a big part of the crime explosion, and connected, of course, to homelessness and addiction and all those things. And they're trying to sabotage that again. That's qualified. So you look at what happened in Huntington Beach, where the voters passed voter ID in an initiative. So guess what? They're suing them. The state of California is suing Huntington Beach for having the temerity to choose how they want to run their own elections. And then on top of that, they're putting legislation in the legislature to stop any other place putting in voter ID through an initiative or in any other means. I mean, what it all adds up to is a totally arrogant ruling elite in California, drunk on power, absolutely disregarding any challenge to their power, contemptuous of anyone who doesn't share what now anyone can see is their far left ideological obsessions. And I just think it's a turning point. I think it's a moment, if we get this right and we crystallize it correctly and we just show to people this one party rule has now gone far enough. It's just outrageous. And the behavior that you're seeing, the arrogance of these people, because of one party rule on this issue of taxpayer protection, on crime, on everything else, it's got to stop. And I think this could be a real turning point in people's understanding of how we've got to get some political balance back in California. We can't go on like this.
We can't go on like this. But on the ballot in November, there are 2 amendments that the legislature put there, one that makes it easier to raise taxes, one that makes it harder to ever do anything about it again. And they must
Right.
be defeated. This is ACA 1, which drops the threshold for passing taxes to 55% instead of 66.7%, and ACA 13, which makes it harder to pass constitutional amendments that require a higher voter threshold to pass taxes. Very important to defeat both of these because this is so costly. And you are going to see tax increases after every election, and there will be nothing that voters can do about it. This must be stopped.
So at the same time as they've stopped a measure that would restrain taxes, they're letting these initiatives go ahead.
Mhm. Everything is consistent if you see it in the context of a 46-year war over whether it will or will not be easier to raise taxes. The Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association has been fighting on the no, we don't think so side of that argument. We don't think it should be easier to raise taxes for 46 years since Prop 13 passed in 1978. And the governments, the state and local governments, city, county, state, have been fighting to make it easier to raise taxes. And the special interests that get your money have been fighting to make it easier to raise taxes. And over again, there have been judicial rulings or legislative action followed by an initiative to constrain it. Over and over, back and forth. This was the last, most recent battle, the Taxpayer Protection Act, closing loopholes opened by the court in this battle of whether it will or will not be easier to raise your taxes. And instead of letting the people of California vote on that because they knew how it would come out, they went to the judiciary and they got their political outcome from the 7 justices of the California Supreme Court. Yeah, that's fine. Take it off the ballot. Outrageous.
And just to really underline that, I mean, the name, so ACA 1, ACA 13, these are initiatives that are going to make it easier for them to raise taxes and going to
Correct.
reduce our ability to stop them. They're not
Correct.
coming from the people, right? As the acronym ACA, am I right in saying that's Assembly Constitutional Amendment? Is that what it stands for?
That's correct.
Right.
It's coming
So
from the legislature.
it's coming from the legislature, whereas the Taxpayer Protection and Government Accountability Act came from the people with
That's right.
nearly 1.5 million signatures. This is a bunch of legislators who want more money for their pet schemes. And
Exactly.
it's just sort of mind-boggling that this is all happening at the same time. Your right as a citizen to constrain their tax increases is ruled illegal by the court. Their right to keep raising taxes without limit sails through. I mean, it's just
I,
outrageous.
I just want to say something to the rest of the country that thinks that California is, quote, so blue and that Californians vote for all this and we deserve it because we voted for it. I want you to see this. Open your eyes and see that the people of California were about to constrain the power of the government to raise taxes, and the government refused to allow the vote. The government that says it's for democracy refused to allow the vote. See
And it's
that.
the
Open your eyes and see
exactly.
that.
And bear that in mind when you hear all their lectures about undermining democracy. They're the ones, in this instance, who have undermined democracy in order to protect their ability to raise taxes without limit. It is completely disgraceful. Susan, I really, really appreciate you not just fighting for the issue, that's the main thing, but being here to explain it. We're going to talk a lot about it. We're definitely going to make sure we focus on ACA 1 and ACA 13. And I hope you'll be I mean, last point, actually, just before we close it out. Are you going to come back for another go on taxpayer protection? I mean, you can't. There's nothing you can do now, right? There's no appeal or anything. But can you?
No, there's apparently no appeal to the federal courts on something involving the California Constitution. That's between us and the Supreme Court. But we
Right.
certainly will be back, and I hope everyone joins the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association to strengthen this effort at
Yes.
hjta.org.
Absolutely. Totally agree with that. We're going to keep on it. Susan, for now, thank you so much. We'll see you very soon. We'll see all the rest of you back here for the next episode of The Steve Hilton Show.